Welcome to the Reinvent Your Life podcast, the show that talks about why we do what we do and how we can do it better.
Welcome to the Reinvent Your Life podcast. My name is Chaz Molesky, and today we are going to talk about how inaction is the catalyst for anxiety. So I work with a lot of people that have experienced high levels of anxiety or are currently experiencing high levels of anxiety. And I have like a personal connection to this topic because it's been something I've battled my whole life from the earliest I can really remember, of having these awful, terrible panic attacks at night because I was so anxious about what was going to happen the next day in school. I wasn't a very confident kid. In fact, I had zero confidence whatsoever. And that led to a lot of bad habits and bad patterns that I would exhibit when I was stuck in stressful situations. And for me, school was very stressful. So what would happen is I would have these uncontrollable panic attacks and these anxiety attacks where I would be so afraid of what would possibly happen the next day. And it wasn't even something that would be like violent or aggressive. I wasn't getting bullied. There was nothing like that. I was so afraid of making a mistake or getting a bad grade or failing at something in school and getting made fun of and rejected. I had all of these social fears surrounding what was potentially going to happen if I went to school, but I didn't have enough information to truly back that up. And what would happen was I would fill in the gap right between where I was and then the future of what could possibly happen. I would fill in the gap between that with answers to what I was afraid of, right? So I would always tell myself that something bad was going to happen at school to me because stuff always happened to me at school. I was the victim, right? So what would end up happening is I would focus so hard on all of the things that I couldn't control, how the teacher was going to be that day, what their attitude was going to be like, what their mood would be, if my friends were going to be sick and out of school and I would have no one that would make me feel safe. I would have so many different things that I would have to experience and go through in my head, and I'd rehearse these things, and I would just think about them and think about them and think about them, and each time it would get worse and worse and worse, and I would get more scared each time that I would go through this process. And the whole time, I wasn't doing anything. And the clients that I've worked with that experience significant anxiety, when they're at their peak anxious state, when they have peak anxiety, they're taking zero action. They're sitting and dwelling and thinking about potentials, possibilities, things they're afraid of, things they don't want to happen, things they do want to happen and are afraid that they won't. They're afraid of potential risks and outcomes that are going to be negative, consequences of decisions. There's so many things that they enter into this thought process of, which results in this anxiety of what if. And we ask ourselves this question, what if? Well, what if it doesn't work? What if it goes wrong? What if I'm not good enough for this? What if I can't handle it? What if I can't make it through to the end? What if it's not what I want? And this paralyzes us. And we stay stuck in this pattern because we think that once we find the answer, like the definite answer to this thing, then we'll be able to move on. So we say, well, what if this happens? All right, well, let me look for all of the examples of why this one specific thing would happen to me. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look for all of the stuff in our lives that give us an indicator that that thing is going to happen. See, when we try to avoid things from happening, we have to actively look for them to keep ourselves guarded from them. It's a catch-22 in the finest, but what ends up happening is the more we focus on the things that we don't want to happen, the more often they happen. Isn't that funny how that works? And the whole reason is because in order to get rid of something, in order to protect yourself from something, you have to first identify it, right? If you're going to be out in the water, in the ocean, and you are on a shark alert, right? There's a shark in the water around you. You're going to look for the shark because you don't want to get bit by the shark, right? It's the same exact concept. When there are things that you don't want to happen around you, you're going to look for those things because you don't want to experience them. And the more that you look for them, the better chance you have at finding them. So when you're sitting in these anxious patterns and all you're doing is thinking about the what ifs, and the potentials of what could go wrong or what could happen, or you start dwelling on things that have happened before that you don't want to happen again, and you start anticipating that this stuff is going to happen to you, you're going to just start training your body to respond in its known anxious patterns that you've been building this whole time with the same pattern. Instead of doing this, you have to stop this process. You got to cut yourself off halfway through and say, all right, hold on. Let me ask myself a couple questions here. All right. This end that I'm saying is going to be a definite, right? These what if situations, scenarios that I'm running through my head. Do I have all of the information I need to prove myself correct? Or is this actually true? Do I know for 100% certainty that this thing, this negative outcome that I do not want to happen, do I know for sure that it's going to happen? No, I don't? Okay, good. So then I don't have to act in accordance to that being fact. I don't have to pretend that that thing is 100% guaranteed going to happen and I have to live my life afraid of it, because I have a choice here. I can choose how to dictate my future, what I want to get out of the situation that I'm in, what I want out of my future. I have the ability to put myself in a winning situation rather than just cowering to my surroundings and waiting for life to happen. Anxiety happens when there's a gap, when there is space for something to enter, for you to now replace whatever's in your mind with this potential future that could or could not work out for you. That is where anxiety thrives, in the gap between the now and the then. And the bigger that the gap is, the worse the anxiety gets, because the further away you get from taking action towards this one thing that you want to do or you have to do. Sometimes it's not something you want to do. Sometimes we avoid doing things that we have to do, and that gives us anxiety. So the more that you prevent yourself from doing this, the more you prolong and push this off, not only the worse are you going to feel, but the bigger the gap becomes for all of the anticipation to build. And the more that it builds, the less likely you are to take any action towards going anywhere. This is why anxiety and depression work in such a spiral. Anxiety keeps you paralyzed, and depression doesn't allow you to move forward. So you stay stuck. And they work on this infinite loop until you break the pattern. So once you break the pattern, it's asking yourself these questions of saying, do I really know that this is all true? Yes, no, okay, great. The second step to all of this is when you start feeling anxious, when you start going through an anxious spiral, or you start encountering a big amount of anxiety in your life for whatever reason, take action. The worst thing you can do is sit around and wait. That will create a longer gap, and the longer the gap is created, the harder it is to get out of this anxious state. So if you're somebody who chronically has anxiety, evaluate the amount of movement and action you're taking in a day's time, especially when it pertains to things you know that you have to get done. The things you're procrastinating and putting off to the future, what are those things? And write them out. Get an idea of them, because half your anxiety is probably coming from just knowing that you have things you have to do, but you don't really know what they are. Now you're afraid of figuring figuring out what they actually are, because then you'd have to do something about it, right? And if you've gotten so far away from it, oh man, then we're really getting into trouble. So before we get into that rabbit hole, we want to stop that process by addressing everything that needs addressing in our lives, but doing it one at a time. You don't have to overload and overwhelm your senses, but take action on something. Make progress towards something. Put the power back in your hands so that you're not at the mercy of life, so that your life isn't dictated by everything else that's going around you. Put yourself back in the driver's seat here, because that is how you start managing your anxiety. That's how you take control. When everything's feeling so out of control, when your life is spiraling out of your own hands, when you feel like there's just no hope for you, what's happening is you're not taking the right actions. You're not putting yourself in a winning position. You're dwelling on things you can't change, and you're fearing and anticipating things that have not happened yet. And the more that you do this, the more power you take away from yourself. So when you feel so weak, the reason you feel so weak in these states, whether it be depression, whether it be anxiety, whether it be frustration, whether it be anger, anything that makes you feel weak, right? Weakened down to your emotional core. When you experience this type of stuff and you go through it over and over and over and over again, your body gets used to it. You start running this pattern, you start habituating yourself to the feeling of this emotion so that when you start to go into an unknown territory and you feel anxiety creep up, your body responds in the way that it knows how to respond to anxiety. So it says, oh, this is a new situation. Okay, start breathing shallow. Start breathing very, very fast, okay? Shortness of breath. Make sure that you clench your fists, get your muscles real tight. Make sure you stay on alert. Keep your eyes wide open. Look around a lot. Do all of the things you do when you get anxious is basically the conversation that your brain has with your body. Now, if you can rewire this conversation, if you can change the language that's happening in this situation, you're saying, okay, I'm starting to feel some anxiety. What does that mean? That means I got to take action. Okay, what do I need to take action on? All right, well, the main source of anxiety that I have is this one specific example. There's conflict at work that I know I need to address and I need to get rid of, and I've been putting it off for weeks. Okay, great. Let's take some action on that. What do we need to do? Do we need to game plan? Do we need to think out how we're going to have this conversation with our coworker that we're frustrated with our boss that we need a raise for? What is the crux of this outcome that we want? And how do we need to prepare for this situation? Okay, great. Let's start preparing. Get some confidence building inside yourself to actively go after this thing. That way, when you're taking action towards the actual thing you've been avoiding, you're much more prepared. You feel more confident to overcome it. And the anxiety, while it won't be gone, it will be mitigated as much as you can possibly control it, because you're putting yourself in a winning, opportunistic situation. See, most people just coast through life and let things happen to them. Emotions happen to them. Life happens to them. It doesn't happen for them. They don't use it as an indicator of what good could possibly come of something. Everything is just, woe is me, and I'm being assaulted by life. Listen, use life. Use the things that come your way. Train your brain to start understanding that while anxiety is not something that you want to keep forever, it is something that can be very beneficial to you if you learn how to master it, if you learn how to make friends with it and understand it and get to the root core of why you're anxious in certain situations. When you can get to that point and then you can take action on your discovery, you will feel a feeling of self-power and self-confidence and self-growth that you've never felt before in your life, because you're the one that decided to do it and nobody else did it for you. That is real change. So if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety, evaluate how much action you're taking on a daily basis, and if it's nothing, then start improving that. Start taking action. When you get into that anxious state, when you start feeling that anxiety creep up and you start focusing on all the wrong things, stop yourself in that process. Okay, I'm feeling anxious. What do I need to focus on right now? I need to focus on all of the things that I know I can control in this moment. Great. What can you control? Well, I can control the thoughts in my head. I can control what I'm focusing on and thinking about. Awesome. What do you need to focus on to get through the situation? I need to focus on how I can remedy this problem at home. I need to figure out how I can have this conversation with my wife or my husband so that we can grow together as a couple. Okay, excellent. Where do we need to start from there? See, you're working your way through your solution rather than thinking your way through the problem. It's working your way through the solution. And every time you do this, you will get better at it. You will feel more confident at it. And eventually it'll become so second nature to you that your automatic response when you start feeling anxious is, okay, great. What do I need to do? What has to happen? What action call is this coming through to me as? What do I need to do in this situation to make sure that I can control this the best I can? See, when you ask yourself better questions, you're going to get better responses. And when you get better responses, you take better action. When you take better action, you get better results. So if you found this helpful, as always, please share this with a friend. Send this to somebody that you know is super anxious and could benefit from the help. As always, guys, please, if you have not yet, please follow, subscribe, and leave me a review. It really helps me out, and it helps me get to other people who need to hear this message. And I can't do it without you guys. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for your attention. Take this information, use it, incorporate it, and reinvent your life. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Reinvent Your Life podcast. Now go out and apply what you just heard to start your reinvention. Please subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with those that need it most.